Welcome to the debate. We are focusing today on what is probably the most significant foundational shift in U.S. industrial and security policy this year. That's the massive restructuring of the critical mineral supply chain that followed the enactment of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA, back in July 2025. This legislation is really a centerpiece effort aiming to secure the essential materials for the global energy transition.
And, any policy that touches the critical mineral supply chain is just inherently volatile. The geopolitical stakes, the sheer scale of the capital involved. The materials we're talking about, lithium, cobalt, nickel, these are the actual physical building blocks of the entire transition.
Exactly. Which brings us to the central question we have to grapple with. Does the OBBBA's new federal policy framework effectively secure and stimulate the domestic critical mineral supply chain? Or do its structural changes end up undermining the very market signals that you need to drive long-term investment? My position is that the OBBBA correctly focuses on supply-side security, and it implements these strict, absolutely necessary controls on foreign influence. It recognizes the geopolitical realities of mining.
See, I come at it from a different angle. While security is, of course, paramount, I believe the policy fatally removes crucial commercial demand drivers. And maybe worse, it injects a debilitating level of short-term uncertainty into the kinds of very long-term mining investments that we absolutely need to meet our energy goals.
Well, my position is really founded on the OOBB's meaningful and immediate supply-side support. Given the sheer scale of geopolitical volatility and just the basic reality that you can't just pick up and relocate a mine, government intervention has to provide a floor of certainty. And the bill provides substantial, immediate financial allocations that directly reinforce the U.S. national security position.
Okay, let's get into the specifics on that financial backing.
So we're looking at $2 billion directed straight to the Secretary of Defense. That's to boost the U.S. strategic stockpile of critical minerals through the National Defense Stockpile Transaction Fund. That is, the ultimate hedge against any kind of foreign disruption. And then on top of that, an additional $5 billion, which is available through September 30, 2029, is allocated for critical mineral supply chain investments through the Industrial Base Fund. So that's $7 billion focused squarely on hardening our domestic extraction and processing base.
That $7 billion is certainly significant, for defense-related objectives.
But it's beyond the money. The legislation addresses the core security vulnerability, which is foreign control. It adopts a far more stringent definition of what were previously called foreign entities of concern, or FEOCs. They're now recategorized as prohibited foreign entities, PFEs. And this is an expanded net. It includes specified foreign entities, SFEs, and this wider group of foreign influence entities, or FIEs. Crucially, these PFEs are now, and I think correctly, barred from accessing the highly lucrative 45X production tax credits starting in 2026. This prevents public money from bolstering rival supply chains.
The security element is definitely tightened. I'll grant you that. But focusing solely on the supply side, especially through defense appropriations, while you're simultaneously crippling the commercial ecosystem, that seems fundamentally short-sighted to me. The problem is that the OBBA doesn't stimulate the market. It actively damages it by terminating the Section 3D Clean Vehicle Credit. That's the $7,500 incentive for consumers.
But we had to draw a clear line on foreign involvement. And the OBBA ensures compliance standards are continually adapted. It does this by mandating the Secretary of the Treasury to establish updated mineral-by-mineral thresholds for what's called the Material Assistance Cost Ratio. That's by December 31st, 2027. And these new benchmarks, they have to be equal to or higher than the previous ones, which explicitly prioritizes U.S. availability and national security. It ensures the definition of clean and domestic keeps shifting to meet our strategic needs.
Well, all the security acronyms, PFE, SFE, FIE, they sound impressive, but the commercial reality is that electric vehicles are the single largest, most visible, and most sustained commercial driver of critical mineral demand globally. And by terminating that 30D credit, the OBBA immediately creates uncertainty for consumers, That dampens EV adoption rates, which in turn just chills broad mineral demand.
But mineral producers need guaranteed revenue streams, and the government is providing that directly.
Exactly. And the moment that demand outlook becomes uncertain, automakers, the major downstream users, they become far less inclined to enter into those long-term mineral offtake agreements. Those agreements are the lifeblood for a mining project. They're what you need to secure multi-billion-dollar financing. And this difficulty is made so much worse by the commodity price drops we've seen. Lithium dropped 87% and cobalt 60% between 2022 and 2025. It's already a high-risk sector.
And how does that connect to the production incentives?
Well, compounding the demand problem is the revision to the Section 45X production tax credit. Before OBBA, the credit had the promise of being indefinitely extended for critical minerals. Now, the legislation just eliminates that. It imposes a phase-down that ends completely by December 31, 2033. This short timeline dramatically disincentivizes the massive, long-term capital that's required for new greenfield projects. It's just incompatible with the economics of mining.
Okay, let's address the scale of federal support versus the market need. You continue to characterize this federal support as inadequate, yet the OBBBS provides $7 billion in immediate appropriations for defense and supply chain investment. This directly addresses the national security vulnerability that arises from that supply chain fragility. Given the geopolitical environment, government intervention provides a degree of certainty that the commodity markets simply can't offer right now.
Stockpiling is crucial. I'm not denying that. It's a necessary national defense strategy, but it is not a commercial market driver. Let's put that $7 billion in perspective against the actual investment requirements. The International Energy Agency, they estimate that to meet projected global mineral demand requires a monumental $800 billion in new mining investment by 2030.
That's a massive figure, I grant you.
It is. So government funding, even $7 billion over 5 years, it can't substitute for sustained cross-sector commercial demand signals from the automotive and energy sectors. That $800 billion has to come from private capital. And without the stable foundation that the 30D credit provided, by stabilizing EV adoption, private investment risk remains prohibitively high. That risk profile, the inability to forecast demand a decade out, that is what deters the private capital we need.
I see why you emphasize that sustained demand signal, but I think you're misdiagnosing where the risk truly lies. Before OVBBA, the EY Top 10 Risk Survey showed miners were already pivoting. They were dramatically focusing on short-term operational complexity, productivity, and cost reduction, precisely because of all the market uncertainty from geopolitics and commodity swings.
That's true, they were.
So the OBBBA provides certainty where private capital is already wary. It does this by offering direct government financial backing, not as a substitute for private capital, but as a critical, high-level de-risking tool. This reduces the desperate need for foreign financing, which addresses the security concern while stabilizing the project's initial financial structure. We are tackling the fundamental geopolitical risk that was causing the market to seize up in the first place.
But the length of the incentives is the issue, especially when you're competing globally. We are competing directly against Chinese producers who benefit from deep state subsidies and inherently low labor costs. To offset that systemic advantage, we needed the long-term, stable benefit of the 45X tax credit.
I would frame the phase down differently. I think it signals urgency.
But the rollback of the indefinite extension for 45X undermines the long-term competitiveness of Western extraction. Let's just look at the industrial reality. When we talk about greenfield projects, brand new, high-grade mines in undeveloped locations, these have typical development timelines of what? 7 to 10 years before they achieve commercial production.
That's a substantial lead time.
Absolutely. So if a project started development in 2024, it won't be fully operational until 2031 or 2032. Under the OBBB, only projects that are operational before 2032 will get the full credit, and only for a short window. And the credit disappears entirely by the end of 2033. This short lifespan just ignores the capital-intensive nature of greenfield mining. It promotes shorter-term brownfield projects, upgrading existing, often lower-grade sites, over the necessary massive greenfield expansion that we need to meet that $800 billion forecast. The policy duration just doesn't align with industrial reality.
I'm not convinced that industrial reality demands indefinite subsidies, which place a an unpredictable burden on the national balance sheet. Policy has to be flexible and fiscally responsible. The phase down, while restrictive, it creates urgency for high potential projects and aligns with the need to accelerate deployment to meet national goals rapidly. We can't wait 10 years for every project to come online. The goal of 45X is to incentivize initial domestic capacity.
But this urgency forces developers to prioritize speed over quality and scale. And if we look at the focus of the credit, 45X is for production. The most challenging, capital-intensive step is the initial extraction and raw mineral processing. The OBBA forces a timeline that favors incremental improvements, not the transformative capacity we need to become genuinely supply secure.
I'd argue that the policy is a smart sequencing. We need initial processing capacity online immediately to reduce our reliance on Chinese refining, and that has a shorter lead time than deep extraction. The strict definition of prohibited foreign entities, mandating that material assistance cost ratio, is a long-term investment in security. It ensures that the limited public funds we are spending don't leak into rival supply chains during this critical build-out phase. Security has to come first.
And that focus on security leads directly into the next major structural flaw, the geographic scope. The policy continues the flaw of the previous framework by limiting incentives strictly to the U.S. and existing free trade agreement or FTA countries. This is where security policy and resource reality just fundamentally diverge.
And why is that constraint a problem, in your view?
Because critical mineral reserves do not align with the current U.S. FTA footprint, not even close. For instance, Morocco is the only African nation with a U.S. FTA, yet it has minimal critical mineral reserves compared to the continent's major deposits. The vast majority of global cobalt, copper, and significant lithium deposits, they're outside our current FTA network.
Well, we have to start somewhere, and FTAs offer a baseline for legal and regulatory security.
But this geographic disconnect creates a massive vulnerability. Resource-rich nations, particularly in Central Africa and parts of South America, are excluded from U.S. benefits, and that leaves them with one dominant alternative: Chinese financing and offtake arrangements. We are effectively pushing them into the arms of the very PFEs we claim to be countering. We're already seeing this. South America, for example, has attracted over $151 billion in credit, largely for copper and lithium, and much of that capital is from non-Western sources, because our policy framework is just too narrow.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the necessity of this constraint right now. The policy is explicitly designed to stop material assistance from a prohibited foreign entity, using that new cost ratio metric we discussed. If we expand eligibility too broadly, too quickly, we risk diluting the PFE restrictions. Foreign influence can bypass safeguards through incredibly complex global sourcing and financing arrangements.
So we sacrifice resource diversity for airtight security rules?
It's strategic caution. We are prioritizing control over immediate quantity. And while recognizing the geopolitical complexity, the OVBBA framework mandates the Treasury to consider U.S. availability and national security when setting future thresholds. This suggests an inherent mechanism for a controlled, strategic expansion of eligible sourcing, but only if and when it aligns with our security goals and we can guarantee PFE compliance. We have to build the wall before we worry about the size of the garden.
But that assumes those resource-rich nations are just going to patiently wait 5 years for the U.S. Treasury to decide they're strategically secure enough to be included. They're not. They're going to immediately accept the guaranteed non-conditional financing available from China today. Delaying access to these crucial resources undermines our long-term goals just as severely as lack security.
The OBBBA fundamentally shifts the U.S. strategy toward hardening the domestic supply chain against foreign risk through immediate financial appropriations and rigorous PFE controls. This offers critical long-term structural support, despite any short-term market fluctuation that might worry investors. The objective here is enduring national security.
And I remain highly skeptical that this will achieve its stated goal. Federal policy cannot successfully achieve mineral security by removing the primary commercial incentives for demand, that $7,500 EV credit, while simultaneously shortening the lifespan of crucial production tax credits. These credits are essential for attracting large-scale, decade-long capital projects. The risk of dampened EV adoption and the subsequent struggle to attract that necessary $800 billion in global private investment remains acute.
The complexity of securing these materials, balancing the immediate necessity of geopolitical control with the long-term demands of commercial scaling, is an undeniable tightrope walk.
It is. And ultimately, the success of this OBBBA framework will be determined by whether the government's strategic focus on supply-side security and anti-China measures can generate enough long-term confidence to overcome the profound commercial uncertainty created by removing that crucial consumer demand-side policy. The policy is a gamble. It's a gamble that security concerns can successfully override basic market economics.